Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Digital Policy Decoded track. I'm Nick Allan. I'm a partner at a London law firm called Mishcon Reya, where I lead our video games group. And I'm personally spending quite a lot of time, an increasing amount of time over the past year, advising clients in the video games, mobile games industry on digital regulation of all forms. And we've heard a lot this morning. We've got a tough act to follow here from Celia, Dom, and JP. Who've provided a really great overview of all the digital regulation that we have to look out for. So we're going to continue that discussion, but also add in some more practical boots on the ground experience and advice for people sitting in the audience, specifically how the evolving standards for digital engagement, free-to-play mechanics are affecting the way we design, monetize, and protect our players in 2026. So I'm delighted to lead this discussion with a group of experts who represent the International Social Games Association, or the ISGA for short. If you're not already familiar with the ISGA, it is the global industry body for social games companies. And for over a decade, the ISGA has been an important voice in defining best practice standards and representing the interests of the social games sector. And while social games are a specific subsector of the mobile games industry, the main monetization mechanic of social games, of course, are shared with the wider industry, namely free-to-play. So we can all draw on the experience of this fabulous panel. So I'm going to introduce our panelists now. To my left, we've got Donna Del-Greco, Vice President of Legal Services at SciPlay and an ISGA member. We have Rohan Paramesh, who is the chairman of the ISGA and also Deputy Chief Legal Officer at Aristocrat. Ronit, Bernstein Abraham's ISGA Board Director and Deputy General Counsel at Playtika, and Tom Nutt, who is the Secretary of the ISGA and also the Practice Head of the Lab within SEC Newgate, a global communications agency. So we're going to structure today's panel around three broad topics. So first of all, we need to answer our hook, when is a game a gamble? And we'll discuss a few of the specific regulatory challenges faced by the social games industry, and together with some broader monetization mechanics like loot boxes. Second, we'll discuss the wider digital regulation that we've heard all about this morning, faced by free-to-play monetization more generally, especially in relation to consumer laws. And then in the remaining time, we'll have a look at some practical tips and guidance on how on earth a mobile game developer is supposed to comply in the real world with all this regulation. If you have any burning questions, please do feel to raise your hand during the session. Otherwise, we'll hopefully allow a bit of time for Q&A at the end. So to kick us off with the first topic, perhaps to set the scene a bit, Rohan, I've turned to you. As chair of the ISGA, could you give us a bit of a brief overview of the social games subsector and how they're typically monetized?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Nick, and hi, everyone. It's great to be here in this discussion this morning. It's been a great morning of content. So, as you say, the ISGA, the International Social Games Association, is the global representative body of the social games industry. We've existed for about 14 years, but sort of becoming more and more proactive and trying to raise the profile of the association. We represent social games publishers, and social games, the way we look at it, I'm sure as many of you know, key community-focused games operating a free-to-play model, as you say, and social casino is a large part of the social games industry as well, and often overlooked in terms of a genre, but sort of a really significant one, and as I say, part of social games. So the sort of a key characteristic of social games and social casino games specifically is often this chance-based mechanic, so often in the form of a slot mechanic that sits there. But the games are played purely for entertainment purposes only. So nothing of any real-world value can ever be won. There's no cash-out mechanism in that sense. So often the apps have the word casino in the title or Vegas in the title, but actually, as I say, there's nothing ever of real-world value to be won there. They're purely for entertainment, and community is a really important part of it as well. So the social side of social casino and social gaming is important, and they're tremendously important for community building, and players really enjoy that part of it.
Thank you, Rohan. So, Donna, perhaps I could bring you in here. If I were to create a mobile game then that's themed around, I don't know, a card game or a casino game then, and you can place bets using virtual currency, Where's the line drawn? Can you just explain to the audience a little bit more about where that line is? When is a game a gamble?
Yes, I can do that. Hello, everyone, and thanks for coming to listen to our talk. So just because a game has got like casino elements in there, it doesn't necessarily push it straight into the gambling realm. To be in the gambling realm, I think to tackle our question head on, there needs to be three components. The first is there has to be a stake, there has to be an element of chance, and there has to be a prize with a real-world value connected to it or a cash out. Now, in the social space, we don't have the third element. There's a prize, but you definitely can't bring it back into the real world. It always stays in the game.
So that definition, is that presumably the UK definition of gambling? Is it the same everywhere?
It's the universal definition of gambling. It's certainly the ones that the regulators look at. So in a social environment, if you've got any ability to take your prize out of the game and bring it into the real world, then that would fall into the gambling realm. So very much in the social space, we need to make sure that when you win coins, they stay in the game and you can't bring it out. And then it would be classed as a digital consumer product, looking at today's head.
So what's the position on, say, loot boxes? Ronit, could you talk us through that? Do you use loot boxes in your games?
Sure. So, hi everyone. It's odd to hear your voice in the microphone. Good morning. So, yeah, loot box is a very interesting mechanics. Most of the social games, not only casino ones, social games as well, have that mechanics. Now, loot box, when we look at the regulation of loot box globally, actually it varies jurisdiction by jurisdiction. You can see actually different trends globally. When, for example, you have a clear ban on loot box in Belgium and the Netherlands these days. Let's put the issue of enforcement aside. But then, and it's motivated by illegal gaming or gambling laws, while actually you have other jurisdictions that look at loot box and the regulatory environment around it more from consumer protection side and trying to regulate it. Now, the most important thing about loot box is, as Donna said, not to have the secondary market, meaning because having a loot box that will actually end with secondary market can be considered illegal gaming. And we just saw court cases about that in Austria not long ago. So the regulatory environment about loot boxes varies jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and it's very important to look when it comes to compliance on the relevant jurisdiction and to do a valid risk assessment in view of that law. I will say something interesting that I learned today in the morning, by the way, that a new initiative for regulating loot box in New York has come as a proposal by the governor and the attorney general, if I remember correctly, when they're actually looking both from the illegal gaming and consumer protection lens to prohibit or to limit loot boxes in social games.
So how do you manage this multi-jurisdictional question? You mentioned loot boxes are banned in some territories. There may be some different definitions going on. Do you want to stay with you, Ronit, or would anyone else like to take this one?
Sure. So I can say that, for example, with us, we clearly do a risk-based assessment per jurisdiction, and then you actually have to have the technology to support that. Meaning you have to have the ability technology-wise to have different toggles, to align it to different jurisdictions, to look at geo-blocking in certain situations. So you need to have the ability to have a risk assessment and the technology to support that in order to be as much as compliant as you can according to your risk assessment in different jurisdictions.
Thank you. Tom, I'd like to bring you in now. Could you tell us a bit more about the work of the ISGA and how you support these challenges faced by its members?
Yeah, very much so, and hello everyone. So I think building on Ronit's point, one of the most sort of valuable elements of the ISGA work is understanding those risks globally. So it sounds terribly dull, but a huge amount of our work is around monitoring and understanding the dynamics of regulation in the different parts of the world. So, you know, my team is operating in Washington, DC, in Brussels, London, and we have consultants in Australia, which covers the kind of key markets where the change is happening at the fastest pace. And I think the crucial thing that, you know, we really want to emphasize in all of this is kind of two elements. First is that social gaming, social casino is a very specific subset. So all our games are over 18, so they are age-gated in that respect. So we're not looking at what some games will be looking at around How do you ensure that children are safe on the game? Children are not on these games. But crucial to emphasise that we've all discussed about is that there is no ability to take anything of value out of these games. And what has happened over the past few years is there has been a greater need to differentiate. Obviously from real money gaming, that's fairly straightforward, but actually there's increasing innovation in the industry around sweepstakes games, for instance, where through a quite complicated mechanic of a number of steps, you can take things of value out, so they may be prizes, not currency, and that, from our perspective, is a different product to a social game, a social casino, where there is a community, where there is nothing of real value, and there is a game mechanic that is fun and enjoyable, and we believe completely safe. So the differentiation work of the ISGA is critical, and also the understanding of change of dynamics that are taking place in different jurisdictions. And I think one of the things that we're very aware of is the likelihood of change and dynamics and regulation tends to hit social games first. We're at the pointy end of the spear in quite a lot of the things that are being viewed as digital harms. Now, we very much don't see that perspective. We see games that are fun, that are enjoyable, that create community. The panel here have told me stories over the years of marriages have come from people who have met in social games, etc. And I think that's a crucial element of this, that you're looking at fun games that have what looks like a casino mechanic, but you're not gaining anything of real value. And that's absolutely critical to how these games operate.
Do you think the industry needs to do more to explain that these sort of casino-themed art is a stylistic choice for a specific audience rather than anything more than that?
I mean, I think we can always do more. I think that's a very fair point. And I think, the reality is that millions of people are playing these games globally. So there is a fair degree of awareness from a player. Is that widely understood in the regulatory and policymaker audience? It can always be better understood. And I think, one conversation that I imagine is happening throughout an event like this is the level of innovation and the level of brilliant work that's happening in the creation of really captivating games is well ahead of where regulation can understand it. And that constant need to educate the policymakers and the regulators is beholden on the whole industry, of which we are a subset. We're playing our part. We can always do more.
Thank you. And Donna or Rohan, Tom mentioned the Washington decision about this sort of thing of value concept. And are you seeing regulators try to broaden out the definition of value to include things like gameplay advantage or time saved?
I don't think there's necessarily any huge global trend of wanting to broaden that out, but I think it speaks to the point that Tom was addressing just now of a sense of confusion among policymakers and regulators who, in an enthusiasm to ensure player safety and to protect the player in their journey, might accidentally, in many cases accidentally, bring social casino games under the same tent. And so I think that's something that we have to be super aware about, because, as you say, we working in the social games world, or players of social games, social casino games, may be well aware of exactly how the game models and mechanisms work versus a regulated gaming product. But actually, a lot of people out there aren't aware. And when often when the apps have the words casino and Vegas in their title, and they have a skin to the game that actually could lead someone on a first view to believe it's a real money gaming game, I do think the onus is on us to make sure that we are providing clarity and transparency to the whole ecosystem, not just to our own players, but of course to our players, but not just to our own players, but to policymakers. And that's actually a really important part of why the ISGA came to exist in the first place. It's a group of businesses, and we are happy to work with loads of businesses. It's definitely not a closed loop of members, and membership has grown because actually what we've seen is that trend of publishers and developers wanting to join a common voice to help provide that clarity to all stakeholders in that ecosystem.
Thank you, Rohan. So I think in the interest of time, we'll move on to our next topic around digital regulation and virtual economics more broadly. So, from being a relatively unregulated industry around, say, 10, 15 years ago, suddenly games and mobile games have a rather frightening array of regulation around the world to contend with. The EU Digital Fairness Act, the CPC principles that we've heard about, the UK's Online Safety Act, the Australian ban on social media, and maybe one to follow in the UK. There's a vote in the House of Lords in the next day or two on that as well. So how do we deal with this in practice? Maybe if come back to Ronit and the CPC principles, which were introduced last year, aimed rather squarely at virtual currency and games that use them, which affects, of course, a wide number of mobile games. Could you give us a little bit more of an overview of the CPC principles and what it means for mobile games?
Sure. And I think that there is, just addressing what you said, there are more laws now, but actually, I don't think there are so many new laws. It's more about a new attention and focus on social mobile games due to even more broader issues which are political sometimes. But let's drill down to the CPC. So the CPC is a group of consumer protection authorities, mainly in the EU, that actually gathered, and I think that they had a very structured way of achieving a certain goal. It started with, in September 24 already, with a report that was a Buke report, if somebody heard that was starting to mention and address the virtual currencies and the virtual services of games as to see them as real-world services that needs to be addressed as such. And then we also, and this actually gave the leverage to the CPC authorities to start investigation of a game studio. The first one was Star Stable, for those that heard it. So everything is part of the same movement towards March 25, when it's true that the CPC principles were published. It's actually a set of 7 principles. They are non-binding at the moment, but 7 principles that are adhering to the same purpose of inducing fairness, transparency, trust, and the most important thing is addressing virtual currencies as real-world currencies, and hence putting on them a lot of requirements that are coming from consumer protection laws that exist and maybe wants to achieve, which is under the Digital Fairness Act. So as said, those principles are aiming to provide transparency, and the biggest change that they're talking about is transparency with the virtual currency. What does it mean? It means that actually the principle expects the developer to have the real-world money value of every virtual currency bundle or package presented to the player in the moment of purchase, but it goes even more. Even with virtual currencies transaction within the game, the developer needs to produce a certain real-world money value as transparency for the player. We all know what it means, a game's economy. It's something that is very difficult to achieve. And moreover, I can say that for us, for example, we actually all the time want to refrain of showing any real-world money connection with the virtual currency, because we actually come under the assumption that our virtual currency within our games and the premium currencies, well, they have no real-world value outside the game. This is why also we are fighting secondary market so much, because we don't have that, we don't need that benefit of secondary market. We are not gambling, we are social games. So these are the main aspects that the CPC principle are trying to achieve now. As I said, it's non-binding principle. However, they're trying to be the basis for the Digital Fairness Act, which will be binding.
Thank you, Ronit. So, Donna, perhaps you could talk to you, build on what Ronit said about the Digital Fairness Act. If you could perhaps give us a little bit of an overview of that, the recent report, and how it relates to the CPC.
Yeah, there's been a recent report on the Digital Fairness Act, and the intention there is to reduce the opaqueness and to give more transparency as to what's going on when you're playing a social game. I think just dialing back a little bit, if we think about products in the real world, if you go to a shop and you buy something, you buy a jumper, you get it home, you wear it once, the sleeve goes bobbly, you've got rights as a consumer, you can take that back. If you buy something from Vinted, that's like my favorite platform currently, and it arrives and it's not as described, you can go back to them, you've got rights, you can return it, you can get your money back. But the digital world hasn't caught up. And the whole thing now about games being a digital consumer product, it's that world catching up. It's giving the consumer rights fundamentally that when you make a digital purchase, you will have similar rights to those that you have attached when you go and buy the jumper or you buy the item from Vinted that have been missing from so long. Some of the key principles about the Digital Fairness Act are around value. So when you buy your virtual currency, understanding what that is, when you use the virtual currency in the game, understanding what you're spending, giving the players more control so that when they make those purchases in the game, they know what they've bought, they have the ability to turn off certain features, for example. It's about giving them control around pressure elements. It's about disclosure. So when they've made purchases in the same way, for example, if you would make a purchase in the eBay app, you then have you can go into your player account and you can get a download of what you spent, when, who you bought it from. All of that is kind of missing today. So the Digital Fairness Act is coming along to try and to catch up with where things got left behind from the real world to the digital world.
Are these requirements actually possible to implement in practice, Donna?
I think everything's always possible. It's how far you want to go. I think as operators, we always look at the regulatory curve, and because we're not regulated in the same way as the gambling industry is, where you've got a very strict set of rules that you have to stand by, we're now looking at these consumer rules coming in, and they're coming in really gently. But going back to your CPC point, that is seen to be the muscle. It's there today. It can be used as enforcement action against certain countries. But the Digital Fairness Act will end up being the rule book. And effectively, as developers, as operators of games, if we don't take things more responsibly, when the Digital Fairness Act consultation ends and it comes into force properly, we will have to abide by a very strict set of rules. So it's where you want to be on that regulatory curve. Do you want to be here, like entry level, or do you want to be right over here, being an example, shining star?
I think it's fair to say that the video games industry can't afford to ignore the DFA. It's rather squarely in the sights of the European regulators. So in the DFA's report that you mentioned last year, there's a specific section on video games where 87% of respondents agreed that the price of in-app purchases offered in exchange for paid virtual currencies should also be expressed in real-world currency, such as euro. Another 87% of respondents agreed that there should be more transparency concerning the odds of winning when buying virtual items with uncertainty-based rewards, such as loot boxes. And 85% of respondents stated that consumers should have, and I quote, more control over certain features of video games by having the ability to turn off features such as the sale of virtual currencies, virtual items with uncertainty-based rewards, and pay to progress. That would be quite difficult to implement, I assume. I mean, do you want to come in on that, Donna?
Well, I just wanted to make another point about something that's in the consultation report as well, and it's around when you've made a digital purchase, what happens if the game suddenly vanishes? What happens to all of those digital things? So there's a lot of talk in there. I think it was, again, over 70% of respondents voted for having some rules around that so that it just doesn't just disappear into the atmosphere. Because like when you've bought your thing from eBay, Vinted, Amazon, you've still got it at home. It's still in your wardrobe. You can use it. But when you've made those digital purchases, if they vanish, that's not really very fair on the consumer.
No, and it would be rather serious if virtual currency had to be turned off. I mean, Tom, could we hear from you perhaps? I mean, what's your take on these consumer responses to the DFA, and what role does the organisations like the ISGA have in responding to these type of consumer?
Well, I think, having read that report in depth, I think it provides a snapshot of consumers rather than operators and regulators. I think within that, I think it's excellent that consultations bring consumers in, but I think there is a risk of over-indexing on some of those responses. I think the balance always has to be wrought between the correct level of transparency, the correct level of control for players, but also not things that get in the way of the enjoyment of playing the game. And I think that's the balance we're always seeking in this. At the end of the day, we're here to provide a fun, social, and enjoyable game that is very low risk in terms of all the digital harms that all these regulations are seeking to mitigate, and ultimately is there for the enjoyment of the players. If you put too many barriers in front of that, it limits the enjoyment, and obviously from an operator perspective, it limits the take-up. But I think crucially, from a player perspective, it limits the enjoyment. And I think we've always got to have two heads on. One is, how do we create the games that make the industry as successful and vibrant as it can be, but also how do we make it as enjoyable and as fun for the players? Because ultimately, that's what these games are here. I think we can all be, they're not here to save the world. These games are fun things for people to do in their leisure time, and to create communities that they can exist in, enjoy. The transparency around what the digital currencies get them is absolutely fine. That there is I think the players, in all the feedback we get, understand exactly what they're doing within the game. And the risk in all of this is that we get to a kind of regulatory environment that's built off a society which is so de-risked as to be sort of slightly anodyne and unenjoyable. And I think one of the interesting dynamics that could take place over the next few years is regulations seem to be heading in one direction. There seems to be greater protection, greater control, etc. And while we welcome some elements of that, I think we also have to mitigate that in terms of things can't get in the way of player enjoyment. And I think these are adult-only games. And I think the reality of all of these regulations is they need to allow players a level of control that is respectful, but also a level of freedom that gives them the ability to enjoy themselves. And look, frankly, that exists across lots of swathes of society, whether it be alcohol or real money gaming, etc. And I think that it'll be interesting to see. I think not to get political on this, I think Donald Trump has had an interesting impact on global regulation in the way the world seeks to look at these things. Both positive and negative, and I think it'll be interesting to see the dynamics of change in the Western world over a lot of these issues over the next few years.
Rohan, do you agree with Tom, and do you think maybe self-regulation has a role to play?
I do. I think it has a really important role to play, and I think, as Tom sort of alludes to, you need to find that balance between hard regulation and legislation, which creates this kind of ultimate framework, the kind of really clear red lines. But within that, I think subgenres of the industry should get together and discuss what best practice should look like. And I think there are advantages to that, to a self-regulatory regime where it can move, firstly, much quicker than legislation can be introduced. So legislation is often catching up. The problem is often evolved by the time legislation comes into force. So it can be much quicker, and it can really capture player behavior. When a group of responsible industry operators are acting in the correct way with their players at heart, really, in the decisions they're making, not polluted too much by commercial objectives, then I think you can really respond to the data and deep insights that operators have and create a set of best practice principles that can evolve. They will be living and breathing, and as I say, that can be far more nimble, and we can be groups of industry participants can be far more quick to act. And I do think that's an important mechanism to, yes, it doesn't have the legal bite that broader framework has, but it does have other advantages, and I think we must really try and double down on those where we can.
Thank you. And staying with you, Rohan, and switching things up a bit to another area of regulation, how about talking about online safety and age assurance? Is that something you're actively looking to implement in your organisation, and how is that going?
It's a hot topic. It's something that's really important because whilst we've, I think said a few times that our games are for adults only, all our games are across the industry are 18 plus at least. Age assurance is an enormous part of that because we need and should want to ensure that it's only 18-year-olds and plus who actually play our games. So even though we don't have children in our games, those below the age of 18, age assurance is equally, if not more important, for us. And as you mentioned earlier, there's this sort of global emphasis now and direction of travel, trying to look at these issues and codify them in legislation. And we have the Online Safety Act in the UK. We have something very similar in Australia, which is a large market for particularly this genre of games, which is being more kind of proactively enforced by the eSafety Commissioner there. We have in the US, which has been pretty light touch on issues of age assurance in mobile video games, now looking to sort of beef up the regime in certain states, Texas, Utah, Louisiana, for example. So we are seeing a global movement, and it's causing video game publishers and developers in our space to be far more thoughtful about it. Is there a kind of a global standard that can be unified and developed into product roadmaps? That would be a bit easier if there was, but actually maybe it's not that simple, and it has to be more nuanced from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So it's a really critical question.
Thank you. Thanks, Rohan. In the interest of time, just move on to our final topic then, just a few practical takeaways to conclude the panel. So, Ronit, if I may start with you, thinking about the CPC principles you were talking about, the Digital Fairness Act, as an experienced and senior in-house lawyer, how do you manage this regulatory risk? You know, if you go into your product teams who are saying, hey, we've got this cool new feature, we think it's going to be very commercially successful and popular. How do you deal with this?
Sure. So first of all, while we need to make sure that compliance and legal are part of the design phase. So we can't be brought to the product when it ends. We need to be part of in the beginning. It's the benefit of the studios and it's benefit for us. And clearly in the end, it's looking about, we're not here to deceive anyone, the player. We're not here about aggressive monetization. We actually want to induce trust and transparency. And let's see how we are able to do that with minimal interference to the user experience, clearly. So just going back to what Rohan said, we actually need to prevent minors from addressing the game and putting safeguards when actually it shouldn't hurt the experience of the adult that is playing. So looking at the CPC, the biggest challenge is the real-world money value to the virtual currency and how actually the change of the economy is going to be. I see it mainly done with a lot of disclosures and transparency to the players.
Yeah. Donna, do you want to comment on that as well? How do you manage risk in your organisation?
Well, in our organisation, in the legal team, we have a brief, and it's to find a way to get to yes. We're not actually here to shut down what the business is trying to do. Believe it or not, we really want to partner with the business. We want to find a way to move forward. Got somebody from SciPlay here smiling and nodding. So I think, yes, it's certainly important for legal to be brought in early on. We certainly partner with the development phase of the games to make sure that what the screen pop-ups look like aren't going to be too invasive for the player. The last thing we want is to kill that player journey. We know how important it is when the players partway through the game, if they see all these pop-ups coming. Come on, we all know when we download an app today how absolutely irritating it is when all of these cookie banners pop up and opt in, opt out. We know we have to comply with that stuff, but we're trying to do it in the most benign way possible so that you can get to the game and get on playing and enjoy yourselves, but being really mindful as to what the legislation and regulations require us to do.
There you are. You heard it here. Solutions-oriented industry lawyers. We're at 5 minutes remaining. Does anyone have a burning question for this panel? Yes, please.
So thank you for your answer. I was going to circle back to the first statement where it was deemed a game of gambling where you can take something out of value out of the game. Now there's a huge trend where, for example, Counter-Strike Go skins, you can't trade them within Counter-Strike, but there are third-party websites that allow you to take them out and trade them for real cash into your bank account. How do you see that trend in this topic?
Who wants to take that? Or is that directed to anyone in particular? Rooney?
So if I understand the question correctly, this is exactly what I mean when I say secondary market. So any third party not related to us as developers that actually are able to take tradable features from within the game and actually trade it outside, something that the company, the developer doesn't support. We are fighting it very, very diligently. We have third-party vendors that actually are looking around on the net, finding those third parties, and we take them down. So we can't have the secondary market as a part of the economy of the game. It will put us in the gambling definition, which we don't want to be there. So I know, by the way, that there are some developers that don't fight the secondary market because it helps them. It's a good buzz. I really hope, apropos what was said here about the self-regulation, that we actually need to better behave, to make sure to give the trust and the comfort to the regulator, not actually to look at us and regulate us, and we need to be together on this one as well. And the secondary market is a very big problem when it comes to social games, and we need to fight it all together.
I wanted to add to that actually as well that this panel is not talking about children because our games aren't focused at, but my child likes Roblox and the Adopt Me platform. We all know there's a secondary market for the pets on eBay, and she likes to buy those pets on eBay. So I've experienced it myself, and they trade for like really huge amounts of money if it's a really rare pet. It's not something I've seen in our own games, but I've experienced it as a consumer. And I find it a little bit interesting because like, it's a quick way to get what you want, I guess, rather than waiting and trading your way through the game to find it.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Thank you for that question. Anyone else have anything they want to ask the panel? Do any members of the panel have anything they want to ask another panelist?
I would like to add something about compliance. I was saying about bringing the lawyers and the compliance in the beginning back. We need to remember that the regulator becomes faster and smarter. And this is where live ops comes into the picture. Compliance is not a one-time situation. We finish, check the box. No, it's an ongoing communication with compliance and the legal team because you have live operations, you have new features, you are adjusting, and the law adjusts on the same path. So this communication and working together with your legal and compliance team is crucial for the success of your company.
Thank you. I think we're nearly at time. Unless anyone else has any final questions, perhaps we could just conclude. I don't know, Tom, a bit of horizon scanning in 1 minute. What's the future of regulation 2 or 3 years? How do you see things going? Oh, sorry. Oh.
If it's okay.
Yeah.
I've been advising games companies in the industry since the 90s. I've been asked now if there is because I think there are some gray zones between all the sectors. So there's a new company now with a platform approaching gaming companies and saying they can have their games with an API into the platform. The platform can decide only doing some play to win in these countries for $2, etc. And the players collect the money, the virtual coin, whatever. In your view, play and win and play to win, etc., I would assume you consider that as gambling, I guess. Or how would you categorize that? Because if you had traditional gaming, you have social games, you have social casino games, and you have what they called iGaming. This kind of platform, where would you categorize that?
Anyone want to take that question?
I would like to make sure that I understand. It's a platform that takes a standalone game, and with an API, it actually provides the platform vis-a-vis the player, but it's not actually the operator or the developer of the game that runs the platform?
No, correct. And the games companies, of course, has to be involved with the developer, and the platform uses an API to connect. So two players, it's not multiplayer, two players can play against each other, and then the system decides you win and you get $2, for example. So that's one idea, is basically to go into countries like Africa. And I'm being a little bit confused about that concept. And I think for me, everyone, the perception, it's, yeah, that's gambling. Because if I give another example, Game of Thrones, for example, is a bit confusing as an IP. Because you have Zynga that do the social games, and then you have Aristocrats that do the slot machine in Vegas, etc. So for a player, sometimes it's like, what is this? So basically, the platform approach, of course, officially gaming companies do an API, plug into the platform, and play and win.
It's a super interesting question, and probably it breaks into two parts. On the IP side, I agree with you that social casino businesses need to be super clear, because IPs can obviously be used between regulated gambling and non-regulated social casino. And so clarity to players is absolutely of utmost importance. So 100% agree with that. On platforms that can bring social casino games or social games onto a sort of a different environment where players can play for money, I think from a social casino publisher perspective, we would not be particularly happy with that without really understanding it better, because that brings something of real world value as a derivative of the game, even if it's not direct. But nevertheless, an indirect cash out or ability to sort of win money from that game, I think feels very concerning to me.
Okay. Sorry, we're starting to run out of time now. Sorry. Of course, please do continue the conversation. I think it's really interesting. Can I get a quick round of applause for our lovely...